Welcome, everyone. I'm Josie Quintrell, the Director of the Integrated Ocean Observing System Association, or the IOOSA Association. On behalf of the IOOSA Association and the other co-sponsors, the Coastal States Organization, National Estuarine Research Reserve Association, Sea Grant Association, and the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar on coastal resiliency. According to our records, over 100 people have registered for today's meeting. I'm sorry we're not able to meet in person, but do welcome the participation from so many. Hopefully we'll be able to meet again soon in person, as I know it's so often the informal side discussions that are so beneficial from meetings like this. In the meantime, I hope you are all well and safe. Coastal resiliency is the ability of communities to prepare, respond, and to rebound from the impact of coastal hazards, whether those are hazards from extreme weather such as hurricanes, flooding and sea level rise, erosion, shifting habitats in our coastal estuarine and Great Lakes waters, or ecological changes from harmful algal blooms, hypoxia, and coastal acidification. The way society experiences these impacts is by what happens where people live and the changes to their daily lives. That's where NOAA's on-the-ground coastal partners, the state sea grant programs, the marine sanctuaries, the estuarine research reserves, the coastal zone management programs, and the regional associations of the Integrated Ocean Observing System are uniquely positioned to provide effective networks and resources to provide the communities with what they need to prepare and adapt to change. These programs provide the research, the observations and information, training, stakeholder engagement, stewardship, and the management and planning tools that can be tailored to the unique needs of our diverse coastal communities. What works in South Carolina may not work on the coast of Oregon. But it's really the partnerships between these organizations that we want to highlight today. Their ability to link and leverage their expertise and skills to provide the range of services needed to make successful, resilient communities. These programs enhance the ability of NOAA and the other federal agencies to provide the in-depth and scale of information needed to address national issues as they manifest at the local and regional levels. We'll hear 3 stories about these partnerships from around the country, from Hawaii, New Hampshire, and Florida. These stories will provide examples about the important ways these programs work to make a difference. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Given our commitment to keep this briefing short and brief, as we know that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, we will be posting detailed information about the speakers you'll be hearing from and the programs of their discussion in the chat. So please look there for more details. Also, feel free to ask questions about whatever you have, and you can do that at any time by posting them in the question box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. We'll hold off answering those questions to the end, but you can post them at any time. I want to thank the staff of the Coastal States Organization for their technical support, and if you have any issues, please reach out to them in the chat. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Tara Owens is a coastal hazard specialist with the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College program. She works with the Maui County's Planning Department to bring science to the planning and permitting process by providing technical guidance, consultations, site visits, and public outreach on coastal hazards and shoreline change. So Tara.
Aloha kakahiaka. Good morning here from Hawaii. Thank you for the introduction and for including us today. Again, I'm Tara Owens, and here in my extension role based on the island of Maui, I serve as a connector to the community and a partner to the county coastal planners that really are the front lines of coastal management. As you know, Hawaii is a special place that readily exhibits beauty and culture, but it also is experiencing the serious impacts of coastal hazards. And now with broad awareness of the magnifying effects of sea level rise, coastal management decisions are more than ever here community driven. And we often say that our direction is community led, government supported. So I will share two examples of collaborative work to address some of these challenges and to support community resilience. One of our most used tools, which is on the screen now, is the Hawaii Sea Level Rise Viewer on the right-hand side. This viewer came into being at the end of 2017, and since that time very quickly became part of household conversations, probably beyond our expectations, and the basis of plans, policies, and decisions. The statewide viewer provides map-based visualizations of the potential impacts of sea level rise, and it's at the property scale. In the short 3 years that this information has existed, it's becoming institutionalized in many ways. It's now part of our state and county hazard mitigation plans. It's being incorporated into community plans that direct land use for the next 30 years. It's the basis of ongoing vulnerability assessments for capital improvement decisions. And here in Maui County, even the maps of projected erosion with sea level rise are now proposed as the basis for shoreline development setbacks. And that would be a way of ensuring safe siting of coastal development and protection of our cultural and environmental resources. Now, importantly, what makes all of this snowball from ideas to development to implementation is the collaborative partnerships to leverage resources. In an island state like we are here, resources are limited, and every successful outcome relies on partnerships. In this case, NOAA awarded grant funding for the work and provided elevation data for mapping. The University of Hawaii developed locally based sea level rise models. The Regional Ocean Observing Program, which here is PAC-IOOS, developed and hosts the web-based viewer, the sea level rise viewer. The counties rely on these science and university-based products as an unbiased and reliable source of information. And Sea Grant is the outreach conduit that provides on-the-ground technical support to the planning agencies and the decision makers and the community for real-world implementation. Another tool that is currently underway targets a specific community need in West Maui. So next slide, please. One of my favorite aspects of extension work, like I do, is that it presents opportunities to take complex problems in a place and tailor information and tools to help that community. The region of West Maui is an important coastal community and an economic center for the state that is home to residents, historic sites, and visitor destinations. You may know of Kaanapali and Lahaina. It also happens to be one of the hardest hit areas in our state from high water levels and large swells that result in erosion and impact development and infrastructure. So in response, there was a need to develop site-specific information to strengthen the community and economy by enhancing preparedness. Again, with support from NOAA, this effort has involved a team of researchers from the university and from PAC-IOOS, developing a localized wave model you see on the screen on the left-hand side, which is then validated with on-the-ground photos, and this is my favorite part, of wave impacts that are collected by community members through a mobile phone app, and then turned into a forecast of upcoming wave impacts. And it's kind of like, you can think of like a 6-day weather forecast, but for how waves are going to impact the coast. And we're also currently working with our partner agencies to guide the development of additional outputs for long-term planning. So to sum it all up, I'm privileged to work here in Hawaii, where residents are really aware and involved in everything, and partnerships are truly embraced. Thanks for the opportunity to share a few examples of how university and government can partner to support community-led resilience.
Thanks, Tara. That's fantastic, and it's great to hear of your enthusiasm. So from the far west of the country, we're going to zoom back to the East Coast and hear from Steve Couture, who is the Coastal Program Administrator for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. He oversees the technical assistance services for the New Hampshire's coastal communities and provides input into state coastal policy. He's worked for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for over 22 years and is an expert in watershed management. And I should note that he's also the current chair of the Coastal States Organization. So Steve.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will illustrate how the partnership efforts of NOAA, the Northeast Observing System, Sea Grant, the Research Reserve, and the Coastal Program are focused on improving the resilience of the Hampton-Seabrook Estuary. The Hampton-Seabrook Estuary, next slide please, is New Hampshire's largest salt marsh system. It serves as a working waterfront for commercial and recreational fishing, supports an oyster aquaculture farm, and is the back bay for Hampton Beach, New Hampshire's most significant coastal economic driver. Despite all these important characteristics and significant high tide and storm flooding, few resources have been coordinated to help the communities in the state to understand the human and habitat risks and how to manage them. Thankfully, New Hampshire's partners and NOAA have invested significantly to increase the resources necessary to manage the Hampton-Seabrook Estuary. It started with discussions amongst the Weather Service, the Observing System, and the Coastal Program. The Weather Service had been working closely with the town of Hampton, as it was one of the Northeast's most frequently flooded communities. Through some initial modeling work, the Observing System was able to assist the Weather Service communicate storm-specific risks to the community with some preliminary flood forecasting models. To improve upon the effort, the Coastal Program coordinated the installation of a tide gauge that was managed and operated by the Observing System. The Weather Service was able to use this new real-time data to create specific time-sensitive flood forecasts available to the public and emergency managers. Now that flooding information was readily available to the general public, there was a need to help residents understand the current and future flood risks to their properties. Many landowners suffer the impacts of regular flooding, but lack the technical knowledge and expertise to manage current and to appreciate their future risks. To address this gap, the Coastal Program provided funding to the Sea Grant to create a partnership landowner technical assistance program. This combines Sea Grant's technical and outreach expertise with the Coastal Program's policy and regulatory knowledge. Staff from both programs visit a homeowner, assess the property, and later return with a site assessment with management recommendations to reduce their homeowner risk and also protect the estuary. Even with these efforts, we still needed to increase our understanding of the salt marsh. This is being addressed with NOAA, the Research Reserve, and the Coastal Program developing a salt marsh plan for the estuary. With NOAA's technical assistance, the Research Reserve's place-based science approach, and funding and technical expertise from the Coastal Program, a standardized salt marsh habitat map for the Hampton-Seabrook Estuary was established. It serves as a baseline against which future map updates can be compared to determine trends in the marsh extent and condition. The salt marsh habitat data is combined with a marsh resilience assessment to pinpoint fine-scale management strategies to improve marsh resilience. The Hampton-Seabrook Marsh Plan serves as a screening tool to show where restoration, experimental science, land conservation, and land use planning can be most effective in protecting the salt marshes based on current condition, vulnerability, and adaptation potential. Because so many partners contributed to the developing the data set and the model, the results are truly shared and all parties can act on them to leverage as many funding sources and resources as possible. Even with the success and looking to the future, New Hampshire's coastal partners recognize the need to improve their partnership approach. The Coastal Program, Sea Grant, Research Reserve, and Observing System, and New Hampshire's EPA-funded Estuary Program collaborated on a competitive Sea Grant funding opportunity. The proposal was to develop a vision for our programs to better address the resilience and adaptation needs of New Hampshire's coast. The proposal was funded and we have initiated the visioning process, so stay tuned. I truly appreciate the opportunity to share New Hampshire's partnership success. It's what we do. Our efforts continue to be focused on improving the resilience of the Hampton-Seabrook Estuary and getting results. And I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thanks, Steve. That's fantastic to hear about how all the partners are collaborating in one place. So Okay, for our final story and speaker today, we're heading down to Florida to hear from Keith Laakkonen, who is the director of the Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve outside of Naples, Florida. Rookery Bay is a 110,000 acre reserve that supports research, education, training, and coastal stewardship. Their current priorities include watershed restoration, maintaining native biodiversity, and research and monitoring. So he's also the current chair of the National Estuarine Research Reserves Association. So Keith.
Thank you so much, Josie. Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking my colleagues in Sea Grant, CSO, the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, and IOOSA for such an incredible spirit of collaboration. NERA is the National Friends Group representing the 29 National Estuarine Research Reserves around the nation and 3 in designation, including Connecticut, Michigan, and Louisiana, which protect over 1.3 million acres of important estuarine coastal habitat. I work for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection as the manager of Rookery Bay Research Reserve in Naples, Florida. Here in South Florida, collaboration for coastal resilience is part of everyone's ethos, and it is truly an amazing model of ecosystem management collaboratively. There are so many resources of national and international significance that an integrated network of marine protected areas in South Florida was developed for continuity and connectivity. This includes the 110,000 acre Rookery Bay Research Reserve, as well as Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserve, also funded by NOAA, as well as many national parks and refuges, aquatic preserves, and of course, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. Rookery Bay is part of the Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection, and partnering is critical to our mission. One specific example of our partnering is Rookery Bay's involvement in Everglades restoration monitoring efforts. The reserve has been conducting downstream water quality, fish, and juvenile shark monitoring efforts for over 20 years for the first and largest of the Everglades restoration projects, Picayune Strand. Our office also co-manages the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, which is funded by the Coastal Zone Program, where my colleagues in the Florida Coral Reef Conservation Program work with many partners, especially the Sanctuary, Sea Grant, IOOSA, universities, nonprofits, and local governments. Because the environment is such a significant contributor to the South Florida economy, all of our work is collaborative and stakeholder driven. By working together, all these organizations are able to use the best available science to learn from one another to adapt our management in ways that increase resilience as we collectively seek to manage and restore these ecosystems. The vast majority of Everglades restoration and monitoring, as well as coral reef conservation work, depends on all of us monitoring together. Of course, the NERA system is also leading many local and national regional efforts on monitoring environmental change, especially sea level rise. On our coast, the reserves serve as sentinels for change, and our Sentinel Site Monitoring Program is looking at changes in vegetation and ecosystem response to sea level. At Rookery Bay, we partner with IOOSA to manage our combined data so it can be managed and available regionally to help inform local decision makers on the rate of change in these systems. The same type of data is used by scientists and coastal decision makers and often serves as the basis for dozens of programs annually provided by our coastal training program. At Rookery Bay, we actually reached over 1,700 participants during the pandemic. One other thing to note is sharing our local data is part of a larger look at the effects of sea level rise and environmental change in our local communities that are conducted by all the 29 reserves. And all, like Rookery Bay, are working with their CZ partner, IOOSA Group, Sea Grant, and local sanctuaries. In a final example, I really want to hit on work that focuses on improving community resilience from storms. By understanding the resilience of mangrove forests, which serve as living shoreline protection, we're able to look at these mangrove ecosystem responses to hurricanes. Of course, in 2017, Hurricanes Maria and Irma heavily impacted Puerto Rico and South Florida. This work is focused on bringing people together locally and regionally to look how mangrove forests are resilient from episodic events, and especially long-term stressors such as sea level rise. I'd like to acknowledge that this work is funded by the Neuroscience Collaborative, but again, it's a really great example of what is happening to Rookery Bay's collaboration, not only with our sister reserve, Hobos Bay, Puerto Rico, but also with Florida and Puerto Rico Sea Grant programs, as well as universities in the continental US and Puerto Rico. And thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Keith. So I hope that these kind of case studies from Hawaii up to the New Hampshire and then back down to Florida kind of give you a sense of the diverse needs that these programs are working with and how we're able to be flexible, be adaptable, and to use our tools and resources as needed. So right now I'm going to turn to Rachel from Coastal States Organization because she is personing the question box for any questions that people might have. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So please go ahead and continue to input questions into the question box. We do have one question to get started. This one is targeted at everybody, so each of you can do a short answer, which is just what is the secret to your partnership efforts, your collaborative efforts? How do you engage and partner with the other organizations, and what makes that successful?
This is Steve. I'll chime in first if I can. I think it's really, it's kind of an ego check. We all want to do what's best for the state and with the funds that we receive, and trust. We each trust each other in our programs and what our capabilities are, and we communicate. And it's just a commitment to maximizing efforts and funding, and that's really what makes it work.
Tara, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I don't know if there's any secret. We're always learning, but I think maybe here in Hawaii it's a little easier because we're a smaller community, insular kind of isolated islands, and we just have to work together. So that's a major driver, and because of that, we enjoy it, and it's not competitive. We benefit from that.
Keith, do you have observations you want to add?
Yeah, for us, it's really about looking at the entire ecosystem, not really looking at static boundaries. And so, because South Florida, changes so subtly, then so rapidly, we really have to look at inputs from all parts of the system. And so, us being down at the coast, we really have to work with our partners inland. And and you can say that with anybody around the South Florida coast. We all, I think, bring different perspectives to it. We have different agencies, but at the end of the day, I think we're really, collaborating so that we have a really good approach for ecosystem management, where we're not just in a singular box, not just looking at, what our own priorities are. That we're really, driven by stakeholder involvement.
Yeah, and I think it's a case of where the sum of the parts are bigger than the individual places. And I think the other thing I've observed is that because all these programs are located in the states and the regions, they have a sustained presence. And so that allows for both trust with the communities and trust amongst each other. I think that's another part of it. Go ahead, Rachel.
Great. So we are getting lots of questions. So the next one is, how do you address cultural diversity and inclusion within coastal communities? For example, non-English speakers versus residents versus tourism. And this, I think, is open and directed to everybody.
It's a really good question. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, down in Florida, the research reserves have actually been looking at this issue for quite some time. GTM Research Reserve in St. Augustine has really been looking at this concept called GTM for all, really looking at equal access, that everybody can get to the reserve, not of only, different ethnic backgrounds, but also, people who are, differentially abled to be able to access the reserves. And so I think that's really important in, not just getting, the choir, but also getting different people to come experience the reserve, and not just the school kids that you're maybe part of your programs, but also reaching out to their parents. So I think there's a generational part of it that we're still working towards. But, that's really, what we're trying to do is increase coastal access and try to educate, all these different generations so that they can really be more invested in stewardship of these areas. Sorry, Tara, I'm sure you have something great to say.
That was wonderful. I was just going to repeat again that as people and organizations, we're always still learning, and celebrating and respecting diversity is a hard task. Here in Hawaii, we definitely have this competitive situation between, some people say the host culture, some people don't like that term, but you know, the native Hawaiians that were here to start with, and then our visitor industry, which dominates our economy. And we are always trying to find ways to support, but you know, all of our targets, including our local community, and doing it in a way that's sustainable and respectful and still supports the economy. And it's hard. It isn't an easy thing, and we make mistakes all the time, but we try hard.
I can just add quickly, yes, it is hard, and yes, we are always learning, and we're certainly learning even today about how to focus on this topic. And for the New Hampshire Coastal Program, and I know other programs, you know, they focus on public access and expanding that, and also bilingual resources, not something that we have to focus as much on in New Hampshire. But what we're doing here is trying to work with new groups, ones that we wouldn't have normally, like housing authorities. How do we reach these different people? So we're going to groups that are talking to people that we don't normally talk with as part of our public process, because we're talking with government officials and trying to learn from that process. And I must say it's hard work, and but we're going to make progress, and we're going to continue to see how we can expand opportunities to have dialogue.
Great. So I'm going to combine two questions here, which is one, so despite the success of your partnerships, what gaps are still remaining and how could they be addressed? And what could also help you do your job better?
Well, that's a great question. Who would like to take a start at that?
I can chime in because it'll be, I think, pretty applicable to all programs. Funding and capacity. We can maximize with the resources that we have, everything that we're doing, but when it comes to resilience and adaptation, it's a whole new paradigm that we're shifting into, and discussions and design criteria and migration, whether it be people or habitat. And so, you know, additional funding helps, and then at some point we need the capacity in order to make sure that we're using those dollars the best way possible. So, you know, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's 30 by 30 focused on migration, these are all opportunities and gaps that are going to need to be addressed, and that's just a couple.
Keith or Tara, anything to add to that?
I would just, you know, sort of build off of what Steve was saying. Climate change is changing the way that we view these ecosystems and we view our relationship with our environment, and especially the coast. And I think the gap there is we don't have perfect understanding and perfect modeling for what the future is going to look like. So I think being able to, you know, have ideas and also be experimenting along the way using, you know, this living laboratory approach and really getting input from stakeholders on a regular basis is going to really help inform management, because at the end of the day, you know, I think there's going to be, you know, a lot of learning which is going to take place on how we adjust to, you know, a rapidly changing planet and, you know, lots of other rapid changes in our environment. So yeah, it's a different brave new world out there for sure.
So Rachel, I think we have time for one more question.
Let's let Tara, did you have anything else to say on that one?
I just wanted to echo capacity. Capacity is always limited, and back to the previous questions too. I think one of the things that has made our programs in Hawaii successful is that we have people distributed throughout the communities on the different islands, and the work to sort of handhold the community and the government agencies we partner with is labor intensive, but absolutely needed and necessary.
Great. So do you have one more question, Rachel?
I think we have far too many questions to get to in this short period of time. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up for today? And I think you have some closing remarks, Josie.
Yeah, so I'm sorry we can't get to all your questions, and I'm just thrilled to hear that there are so many. If you want, you can put them, Rachel has them, and we will try and maybe respond offline to our best of our ability. But first, I just want to thank Tara and Keith and Steve for their great remarks today. I really think you provided a great example of how important it is for these NOAA programs to be partnering and be doing the work that's being done. You're all doing such incredible work. It just it amazes me. Just a couple of things before we go. For those who are interested, Derek, who's been running the chat board, and I can't see, so he may have already done this, but we collectively, all of our organizations in the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation as well, and we've done a joint testimony about our FY22 requests, because I think, as Steve so adequately said, is like, it's about funding and capacity to both continue the work that's being done, but as we all know, that the challenges are just growing, and the impacts to local communities is even greater now than ever. So that's available in the chat, and we can provide more information on that as well. Also, this is the first of a two series we're doing on coastal resiliency, and we're going to be holding a second webinar on April 28th, I think at 2 p.m., and we'll be including additional examples from the Great Lakes and the Pacific Northwest. So be on the lookout. We'll send out continuing announcements about that. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and please reach out to any of us with further questions you might have. And be well. Thank you.